This is where we ended last time. We were admiring the amazing achievement of the Greek painter Exekius. There was monumental painting in Athens and elsewhere in the Greek world in the 6th century BCE, but we don't have any of it. We don't have any evidence that in that era, monumental painting, by which I mean simply something on a wall as opposed to something on a pot, would have been so common. It was on pottery that was made for social use and provided an object for social discourse that artists sent messages to each other and reified in illustration some of the themes that animated their culture. And this scene, an invention of Exekius. The heroes are known. The story is not. Exekius made this story on his own. One of the beauties of the story, part of its power, comes from the fact that to any Greek, these were known figures. So it has the same force as the kind of additional storylines that are made up about superheroes and comic book heroes today, where we know these guys, we have some sense of them, and then they're put into new situations. We already have a set of character traits for them. And that's what the Greeks had for Achilles and Ajax, the two characters here on the screen. So Achilles was the Greek hero par excellence, the most illustrious, the one for whom the greatest achievements were associated, but also a hero, as we saw in the Francois vase, who was known to have human weakness and who was known to defy the gods in some ways, most famously when he ambushes the son of the king of Troy. King of Troy was Priam. His son was Troilus. When Achilles ambushes Troilus at the sanctuary, at an altar of the god Apollo, which, of course, is in complete defiance of what was considered right and just and appropriate in the Greek world. It's Achilles here against Ajax, the second most heroic of the Greek heroes, or second strongest of the Greek heroes. We know who they are, certainly because they're labeled. Actually, everything on this face is labeled, including their throws. And so we know that Achilles throws 4 and Ajax 3. What are some of the takeaway morals, the message? You go to a dinner party, you sit down, this is the vase put on a table in the center of the room, and your host says, I commissioned this because I thought that tonight we could talk about heroes, who they are, why we have them, what it means. What do you think? And you turn to the person on the couch next to you and you start to talk. Go. You guys have your poems? The poems. Sorry. I have no idea why that's doing that.
Which poems?
You know, the ones that are on your, Yeah, let me see if Katie's got any more. Katie, do you have more handouts? Not those,
I have them upstairs. I can run up and grab them.
Did we get those last week?
Yeah, they're on the question set.
Oh, they're on that.
Yeah,
yes,
so
I
yeah.
have them.
Okay, good. They're on the question set. You know, you guys, the poems are on the question set. So you have your question set?
No, I lost it.
You lost it. Well, Katie is going to run upstairs to get more, but so scooch down and share with him right now. Oh, without you, something plugged in there. Sorry. You have your the poems from the question set. Those are the ones that you should be looking at.
No, I wasn't here on Tuesday.
That when we handed out the question set. Oh, well then you should scooch over. Do you guys have the poems from the question set? Get up there. What do you think?
Well, it shows that even heroes are like normal people, and they need to have like sometimes to just like some downtime. Play some games.
Heroes. So heroes, in fact, are us. Heroes are regular people. They play. They have leisure. And what are some of the implications of that, Felix?
Well, one thing I was going to talk about was how some of this art projects heroes' humanity. It was in a previous slide I think you showed last week or 2 weeks ago when it showed the suicide of Ajax.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also shows that, you know, even though they are heroes, they too are human. And like humans, they have flaws.
Yeah, they can lose. I mean, here Ajax is losing. What are some of the other? So they have downtime. They have leisure. They're mortal. They're human. They can have flaws. Although here they look pretty good, huh? They don't actually look too flawed in this particular rendition. In fact, they quite deliberately look ready for action. This is a powerful portrayal. They are muscled up. They have long legs and arms. They're very intent. They're very focused. Their musculature is well defined. They're well muscled up. All their equipment is here. They're at the ready. So what are some of the other aspects of their humanity that you see? Katie's got some. People who lost their question sets. The poems are in the question sets. Raise your hand.
You talk about like the fact that if you had this commission and something like this, you're going to be like entertaining somebody, or like that one of them is hosting at someplace, so one of them is at the other person, unless it's like a public setting.
Oh, what a good idea! Yeah, absolutely. That it's very appropriate to have this kind of people sitting down and playing, because it's actually a social setting in which you would see this. That's great. Yeah, absolutely. And so that would give you a real sense of connection. In addition, not just generally speaking, like they like to play games like us, but very specifically, here we are in this situation. We're sitting down for a good time. They're sitting down for a good time. That's funny. That's good. What else?
That even though these two men were friends, still both the physical aspect of being taller, also the fact that he's winning a dice game, there's a power dynamic that's kind of understood.
Yeah. What aspect of the Greek cultural mentality does that reify? Competitiveness, absolutely. This is not, it didn't have to be that they were set up where one was put in somewhat of a position of dominance over the other by design, but that's exactly what Ezekias has done here by, are you working? Are you not working anymore? By the placement of Achilles' helmet still on his head instead of off to the side as Ajax's is. So Achilles is dominant, and then he's got the words coming out of their mouth. That wasn't necessary. They could have just been, two guys sharing a quiet moment. But even in this quiet moment, even in leisure, that aspect is there, and it's reinforced, that aspect of competitiveness. What else? You're looking at this, and you're thinking about what else you know about these characters, who, of course, to you are not characters. They were real. Back in the day when there were heroes among your sort. What else? What do you know about what happens to them? They both die. That, of course, is the most fundamental essence of what it means to be human. They may achieve greatness. They may be famous. Their fame may live on in song, but not them. They may have kleos, fame, time, honor, arete, excellence. But they also have thanatos. Thanatos is the Greek word for death. A hero, in the end, is still mortal. A hero, in the end, is still human. Which poems or poem do you think this vase best evokes? Let me say there's no one answer here. You know, to feel like, oh, but it could be this and it could be that. I don't know, there's almost nothing on here that you couldn't relate to it somehow. Jane?
Well, I would say the Pindar, the thief poem of Pindar.
Which one? Pythian or Isthmian? These are odes. The two at the bottom by Pindar?
Yeah.
Pindar was a poet for hire by the Greeks. When a Greek won a prize in one of the Panhellenic games, so one of the games that were held either at the sanctuary of Olympia or Isthmia or Nemea, these were the Panhellenic sanctuaries at which games were held. Sometimes the winner would commission a poem. What do you want? If you win a great contest, you want to be remembered. So back before we had YouTube and NBC Sports for the Olympics, or whatever else the various people now are being immortalized on, this was how you could be remembered. You could commission a sculpture, or your city could commission a sculpture on your behalf, and there were cities that did that. But the best was to be immortalized in song, just like These guys. How do we know about them? They were immortalized in song. Homer was their muse. He made them famous. He made them live forever. So Pindar was a poet who was a poet for hire, and if you won a prize, you could hire him to write a poem on behalf of your victory. No, that might sound just a touch crass. This is just a class where we build the Greeks up and then we puncture the balloon. We build them up and then we puncture the balloon. That's a bad little truth about them. All right, so both of the two excerpts down here are from two odes of Pindar. One that and they're named after odes that were commissioned on behalf of winners at various games. So Pythian odes are odes that were commissioned by winners at Delphi. And Isthmian odes are odes that were commissioned by winners at Isthmia. That was another sanctuary at Isthmia. Okay, so back. So which one?
The Pythian.
The Pythian. We are things of a day. What are we? What are we not? The dream of a shadow is man no more. But when brightness comes and the gods give it, there is a shining light on man, and his life is sweet. You could imagine that Ezekias had this poem in mind when he created this image, although he couldn't have, because the image is created about a generation before the poem. The poem is written in about 480 or so. Nonetheless, that's an excellent example. Another one? Because?
Well, Achilles goes to war, he's going to die, but he's going to have glory and be immortalized in song. And I don't know, they both die, and they die fighting instead of running away.
Death is a thing that will come when the spinning destinies make it come, and it is a high thing and a bright honor. It's not something to run away from. It's not something to be afraid of. In fact, it is something good. It's something esteemable. It's something to strive for. It is an honor, time. This is what gives you fame. And both of these warriors know that, and that's why they are in the battle. And it is the knowledge of that to die in battle as a hero is the greatest glory, to be acknowledged by your compatriots as a person that worthy and that strong is the greatest glory, that not only animates Achilles, but Ajax, which is why when he doesn't receive the armor after the death of Achilles, he commits suicide. He has been so dishonored. All right. Of course, there are practically any of the poems in here that you could connect with this, but we must move on. You might get the idea from the vases that I've already shown you by Ezekias, the suicide of Ajax, Achilles and Penthesilea, the vase that we were just looking at, that he was one serious fella that never lightened up. But that's not true. And so I'll leave Ezekias behind with this one best, most fun of all of his creations. It's a drinking cup, a cup for wine, called a Kylix, K-Y-L-I-X. And we know it's by Ezekias because he signed the bottom. His inscriptions are just as meticulous as his painting, and of course that stands to reason. Ezekias Grafsen, Ezekias painted me, is what is inscribed or written along the bottom. And what is on the inside of the entire cup, so the entire interior is, my pointer is just totally ditching out on me. What's on the entire interior is a huge red field, that's the color of the clay itself, and a ship, a little boat, and porpoises swimming around, and the mast of the boat is out of the mast is growing a grape arbor and grapes, and reclining in the boat is the Greek god of wine, Dionysus. So this is a very playful, lovely image of Dionysus serenely sailing along in his craft with the craft itself is decorated, both the prow of it and painting on it, with the same sea life that is cavorting around in the lower part of the vase, and the grapes growing across the top provide as much shade as the sail. Dionysus himself is as long as the boat, so it's just a compact single-person craft. You may know that in Greek, in the Iliad, the sea is often called, is the adjectives that are often evoked in Homer to describe the sea, is by its color is classified as wine dark, the wine dark sea. And here you have Ezekias animating in what was surely, again, a specific commission, the concept of the wine and the sea for a cup that was used for wine in a symposium. Fantastic. So in the Greek world, in the 6th century, the century in which we've been looking at a few sites, Athens and Corinth, and we were briefly at Olympia and have heard mention to it. We talked about how in the 7th century there were a lot of, by the time of the 7th century, sanctuaries throughout the Greek world. All of the sites that are labeled on these maps were occupied by this time. There were sanctuaries everywhere, but there were also, as I just alluded to when we were talking about Pindar, a few places that were what's called Panhellenic sanctuaries. Panhellenic sanctuaries were biggies. They were not sanctuaries just for an individual city. They were sanctuaries to which Greeks from all over went. The first established one was at Olympia. We know that already in the early 8th century BCE there were games established at the sanctuary of Olympia, the Olympiads, which took place every 4 years. By the later part of the 8th century, there was a second Panhellenic sanctuary established at Delphi. Every Panhellenic sanctuary had something slightly different about it, something that was somewhat unique. And at Delphi, what they had going for them was an oracle. The Delphic oracle, which was likely established by around the year 700. We have archaeological evidence from Delphi that already in the 9th century it was a village. We find, archaeologists have found, in excavating there, fragments of tripods and bronze figurines from the 8th century, so we know that there were already games going on there. By the 8th century, it was already an established sanctuary, and the numbers of these dedications shoot up in the later part of the 8th century, so it's likely that by around 700 already, the oracle was established. To the sanctuary at Delphi, city-states throughout the Greek world sent, and beyond the Greek world, kings from the east even, came both to consult the oracle and to bring gifts to the priestess of the oracle. The deity who was the primary deity at the sanctuary at Delphi was Apollo. And the oracle was run by his priestess, a priestess of Apollo, whose pronouncements could be accessed by a visit to the temple of Apollo. And she was called the Pythia, Pythia, Pythia. Pythia is the chief priestess to the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi. So to the sanctuary, because so many Greeks came to the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi, lots of places, smaller Greek cities, chose to, instead of using their money to build an enormous temple, or even a less enormous temple, in their own town, where only they would see it, they would gather up their funds and dedicate some kind of structure or other dedication here at Delphi in order that more people would see it, would get more visibility. And among the many small Greek communities that dedicated something at Delphi was the Greek city island of Sifnos, which you see here. Sifnos, small island in the Aegean. And we know from the Greek historian Herodotus that they were a very wealthy island community throughout most of the 6th century BCE, because on Sifnos were gold and silver mines. And so the Sifnians had a lot of money. They made money by both exploiting these mines and also by selling some of the metals from them. But in the year 525 BCE, towards the end of the 6th century, the tyrant of the Greek community at Samos attacked Sifnos and flooded their mines, and their prosperity was over. Why does this little bit of inter-Greek rivalry in the 6th century BCE matter to us? Because before this attack, this wanton attack on their wealth and autonomy, the Sifnians dedicated a treasury, a little building, at Delphi. And because of the specificity of the date at which we know they were attacked, we know that their little building had to have been dedicated by the year 525, or a little bit earlier. Couldn't have been dedicated later. They didn't have any money after that. And their little building has been found, and it's a very remarkable statement, and we're going to take some time to take a look at it. So we are now here at the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi, and we are looking down at the great temple of Apollo. This is the theater that's just above the sanctuary, from which you see down the steep slope of the sanctuary. It's in this very visually dramatic area of central Greece. The territory is Phokis, Phokis. And it's very mountainous, and down in the distance here is, I got to do something about this. Off the other side of those mountains there is the sea. Okay, so here's a cute little colored plan of the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi, and you see the temple up here. So we were just looking from the theater up at the top down, and when you would have come as a visitor to the sanctuary of Apollo, you would have started all the way down here and walked up up this demarcated yellow path, switchbacking your way up and around. You looking for another pointer?
Battery.
I don't think it's. It's just it's loose or something. Okay. So right there where I have now indicated with this little yellow box, that's where the Sifnians inserted their treasury. And as you can see from the drawing here, when you would have walked up the path, the first thing you would have seen is the back of the treasury. So you would have walked up, you'd seen the back, you would have walked around the side, you could have turned around and seen the front, and then you would have needed to turn around anyway because the path continues up the way. So it's at a very dramatic spot, because anybody that's walked up a hill and you're walking up, and it's a little bit steep, as you can see here. This is the entry going up to up the first part of the path. And you know what you do when you get to the very first part of a switchback path, and you look all the way up the rest of the hill, and you see that to which you are going, which in this case would be the Temple of Apollo, and then you think about where you are, you're going to stop for breath. You're definitely going to do that. And when you do, and you turn around, you're going to see the front of the Sifnian Treasury. That's exactly where this spot is. So it's a very good spot. And yeah, here you are, just about here. This is where you're standing, and then you're looking up at these continuation of steps, and you think, huh. And then you turn around to see how far you've come, right? While you're still breathing and panting, and that's when you see the front of the Sifnian Treasury, which was discovered. The Sifnian Treasury was in 1894 by the French archaeologists in Delphi, and the reconstruction drawing that you see here before you shows you to what ends the Sifnians devoted so much of the money from their gold and silver mines. They decorated this little building, which is about 26 by 20 feet, so it's tiny, to the hilt. What's a treasury, you might ask? We don't really know. We call them treasuries. We call them treasuries because we're not, they aren't temples. They aren't altars. They aren't really big enough for anybody to live in. And they probably were not truly receptacles for stuff. Maybe a few things, but there's no indication that they had doors that you could lock them. So it's not as if they were a small bank, like this is where the island of Sifnos kept all its goods, was in the treasury at Delphi. No, it was certainly not like that. So it's a treasury in the sense that it shows off the treasure, in a way, of the island. It's not a treasure in the sense that it controlled anything. All right. The Sifnian Treasury, lavishly decorated with an unprecedented amount of pictorial art slapped all around it. First of all, instead of plain old columns on the front, you see that the columns are formed out of chori. So chori, instead of being freestanding singular decorations, or dedications, I mean, are here doing double duty. They are both acting as guardians and witnesses and dedications, and they're also holding up the building. Above them and wrapped all the way around in a continuous series around all four sides are what we call friezes, F-R-I-E-Z-E. Friezes, and there are four of them for four sides of the building. They are not continuous from one side to the other, so each side is its own story. That matters for you guys because what that means is that, for example, in response to the question on your question set, you could use two friezes from the Sifnian Treasury, and they would be two different things because they're two different subjects, they're two different stories. And then in addition to having four friezes, so four narrative panels, and this is brand new, nobody has done this before, have one extended sculpted narrative panel telling a story. There are two pediments. The pediment is the triangular thing at the top of the building underneath the eaves, and it does not really look like it would be such a great idea to fill a pediment with sculpture because it's a very uncomfortable shape, being as how it's a triangle. And that triangle means that you really have just a few choices about how to squeeze sculpted figures that you're trying to use to tell a story in there. You can make them smaller as you get down to the ends, or you can make them move in different ways, pose them in different ways so that they fit more naturally in the space. And in the case of the Sifnian Treasury, their sculptors were still not facile enough with sculpting figures moving around in different poses, and so it was the first option that that was taken. All right. The north frieze of the Sifnian Treasury, which is the long frieze that you would see as you are finally reaching the top of the first upward path. The long frieze of the Sifnian Treasury is the depiction of one famous story in Greek mythology, and it is the story of the battle at the dawn of time between the Olympian deities and these barbaric other big powerful dudes called giants. The Greek word for battle is machos. And I tell you that because I'm going to be, not just here, but especially eventually when we get to the Parthenon. There are lots of epic battles in Greek mythology, and they all have these long names, these long one-word names that have maki on the end, which means battle. So a Giganta Mickey is a battle with the giants.
Did you say it was the Titans fighting the giants?
No, the Olympian deities. The Olympian deities. When you look up at the frieze, which actually wouldn't have been all that far above your head because the Sifnian Treasury wasn't that high, when you look up, you might think that it would be a little hard to pick out the story from this monochromatic visage ahead of you, but it wasn't monochromatic. Again, truth in advertising, the great color secret now revealed. We know for sure from traces of paint, both on this and on other architectural sculpture that we have, that the background was painted a darker color, and that way the figures stood out from the darker colored background, allowing you to be able to tell what was going on. And in addition, actually, in the case of the Sifnian Treasury, it's a little hard to know exactly who this is for, but they're labeled. Figures were labeled. So if you had pretty good eyesight, not only could you pick out the individual figures, but you would be able to even identify them by name. The Giganta Mickey is a funny episode in Greek mythology because it has a very specific twist. And here's the twist. The Olympian gods fighting these huge, humongous giants there was, what's the word that I want? An oracle or a saying, a prophecy, that the Olympian deities would only be able to win the battle if they had a mortal fighting on their side. You wouldn't think that that would be the sort of thing that would tip the balance. But that's the way it was in the story. And so, in the story, anytime you see the gods fighting the giants, anytime you see a Giganta Mickey, you know that there has to be a mortal in there. And the mortal, who is always the one who is fighting on the side of the gods in a Giganta Mickey, is Heracles. So we've got the gods fighting the giants, and the gods are pretty much all fighting in pairs. They're facing right. They're moving along at a pretty good clip. Right here are Apollo and Artemis. Jeez, it's driving me crazy. They're up there, and you see them here. The gods have attributes, various attributes, that allow them to be identified. So they have thunderbolts, or they have bows and arrows. In the case of Apollo and Artemis, of course, were twins. They were brother and sister, and so when you have a male and a female deity fighting side by side, anyway, you know it has to be them. The giants are depicted as mortals. They're the same. That is to say, they look like soldiers. They look like regular fighters. They in some depictions of the giants in Greek art in this period, they have snaky legs. But here, they just the whole battle is transposed to look like a battle between mortal combatants. They're the same height. They have the same physical characteristics as one another. The gods are, for the most part, fighting with ease. So Apollo and Artemis don't even look to be well armed, whereas the giants are all cloaked up and fighting with helmets and with larger shields. So the giants are all facing left, and with one exception, Hera, the gods are all facing right. The giants have superhuman strength. So even though they're depicted as mortals, they have superhuman strength. And here is one of them. This guy here who's throwing a rock. You can see, and because of his cute archaic smile, he doesn't really look like he's breaking a sweat. He's got this gigantic boulder on his shoulder, and he's about to hurl it, and he might as well be throwing a tennis ball, or a volleyball. I guess he has two hands. So, and the giants are labeled. The giants are labeled, and they are labeled with names that are odd. And why are they odd? They're odd because there are versions of the Giganta Mickey that are told and depicted in Greek painting and are alluded to in Greek story, and sometimes the giants have names. But the names of the giants in this particular version of the Giganta Mickey have names that are unattested in any other version. And some of their names evoke words, Greek words, that have meaning. They're just regular Greek words. They aren't names. And the meaning of the words that they evoke are bad characteristics. So, for example, the giant here who's throwing a rock is named Beatas, whose name has in it the Greek word for violence. And another one of the giants is named Hupertas, whose name evokes the Greek word hubris, which we would spell Hubris. The Greek word hubris is not a word that we've got a single word translation for in English, because it's not a word that we have as a standard concept in our culture. It means a kind of pride, but pride, of course, can be a good thing, and normally we would think of pride as a positive emotion. But the word hubris doesn't translate as that kind of pride. It's not pride like pride in yourself or pride in your country or that sort of thing. Instead, it's the kind of pride that gets you in trouble, the kind of pride that sends you right over the edge. I mean, past the boundaries of sense or decency or moral behavior. Pride that you yourself know better, even if you don't really have any good reason to think that you do. The kind of pride that we might actually call arrogance. That's hubris. So that's what one of the giants here is named. So the Giganta Mickey is one of several categories of Greek myth that does something that's very peculiar, which is that the outcome of the story depends on a very close dependence by immortals on mortals, as if the worlds were so connected that there were actions that couldn't and outcomes that couldn't take place without the combined interactions between them. On the front of the Sifnian Treasury, the frieze on the front, which is so badly preserved that I'm not going to show you any pictures of it, but is sufficiently well preserved that we can know what the story is. On the front of it is another story like that in Greek myth. It's the story of the Judgment of Paris. You know, the story of the Judgment of Paris is when, at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, that one goddess, Strife, who's not invited, comes and she is totally pissed off because she hasn't been invited. And so she comes and she makes trouble. And what she does is she throws an apple, a golden apple, onto the floor, which is inscribed to the fairest. And 3 deities, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, immediately assume that it's for them. And an arbiter must be selected to choose between them. Who is the arbiter who is selected at the judgment of Paris? Paris. Who is Paris? He's the son of the king of Troy, Priam. He's another one of the sons of the king of Troy. So this is another one of these weird Greek myths where the gods turn to men. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis is in fact the apogee of this set of relationships between mortals and immortals. So you might think, so far, from the Giganta Mickey and the Judgment of Paris being 2 out of the 4 friezes on the Sifnian Treasury, that the theme of the Sifnian Treasury is, gods and men together always, bosom buddies, dependent on each other and all for the good, and so on and so forth. Not so fast. So there are 2 pediments. We only have the sculptures from one of them. The pediment that you would have seen when you first walked up the path, so the pediment on the back end, is this scene that you see here. It is another story, this time a story that is very appropriate for Delphi because it's localized to Delphi. It takes place here at Delphi. And the story is that the Greek hero Heracles, he, the guy who helps the gods defeat the giants on the frieze on the north side, Heracles, in a bad episode early in his life, kills a man. This is, of course, one of the great things about Greek heroes, is that they are not totally terrific all the time. That's another aspect of their humanity. In addition to the fact that they can die, they are not always so well behaved. So Heracles kills a man, and when you kill somebody, you need to be absolved of your guilt. And it's a god who can do that. So Heracles goes to the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi to be absolved of his guilt. But the Pythia refuses. She won't do it. So Heracles becomes enraged. And he becomes so enraged that he takes the symbol of the Pythia and the oracle, which is a tripod, and he tries to steal it. He tries to steal it because with the tripod and the cauldron on the top of the tripod, his plan is to set up a rival oracular shrine, I suppose he would think that its very first task would be to absolve him of his guilt. But Apollo comes down, and Apollo and Heracles actually fight over the tripod. And Heracles, being very, very strong, provides a suitable match for Apollo. And so the decision needs to be adjudicated by Zeus. And that's the scene that you have here in the pediment. So Zeus is in the middle, and in fact is the tallest of the figures. And of course I have these pictures down here just to point out to you that remind you from these images that you see here that a tripod cauldron would have been a very weighty, meaningful, vivid symbol of power, of competitive strength, of victory. This was the symbol par excellence of somebody winning something in the Greek world. And so we have Heracles here on the right, trying to make off with the tripod, and we know, although sadly their heads are gone, Apollo and Zeus's heads are gone. We can tell from the way that the muscles in the neck of Zeus are sculpted that he is turning his head back towards Apollo, meaning that he is giving his agreement to Apollo that he should be able to retain the tripod. This is a myth whose animating idea is not only hubris, that would be the arrogance of Heracles to try to steal the symbol of Apollo's oracle, but another characteristic that animated Greek writers and artists and is evident in a lot of stories, and that is a kind of recklessness, a kind of blind recklessness that the Greeks also had a special word for, and that word was ate, which you might spell A-T-E, ate. And those are the two factors that Heracles exhibits. So Heracles himself, while a hero and shown as a necessity in the Giganta Mickey on the North Frieze, is a hero in the most fundamental Greek sense, which is to say that he is mortal and can be undone by his own by aspects of his own mortal behavior, his own human behavior, including arrogance and pride and recklessness. So if you're walking up the path of the sanctuary, actually the first thing that you would see would be the east frieze. That would be the frieze that's on the back of the building. And this is what you have a handout about. The east frieze is something very amazing and interesting because, unlike the other two stories that I've just shown you, the east frieze does not depict some long, familiar standard in Greek mythology. Instead, it is essentially an illustration of a specific episode. It's an illustration of a specific episode in the Iliad. And the episode is a battle that is taking place on the ground at Troy. Can I have one of those handles? And at the same time that the battle is taking place on the ground, the gods on Mount Olympus are watching. They're watching the battle take place. So on the south side of the frieze, on the left side that you can see here, are the gods, and then it's pretty much divided in half. And on the north side are the figures, and you're looking up here at a part of the north side of the frieze. And the story is about the Trojan hero Sarpedon. Sarpedon, according to the text in the Iliad, sprang to the ground in all his arms from the chariot, and on the other side, Patroclus, who is fighting instead of Achilles, who's still in his tent, totally pissed off. And on the other side, Patroclus, when he saw him, leapt down, and now these two, crying aloud, encountered together. And this is a huge pivotal moment in the battle in the Iliad. Huge pivotal moment because this is the moment when everything is finally going to start to happen. You know what? The Iliad is a very strange story, actually. The Iliad is not a story about the whole of Trojan War. and it starts in the last year of the Trojan War. It starts in the 10th year. And when it starts, nothing is happening. And nothing happens for quite a while in the Iliad. I mean, there's a lot of talk, naturally, to fill up all those books. But there's not that much action. And the reason there's not that much action is because Achilles has been all this time in his tent really mad at Agamemnon because Agamemnon had taken his prize, which was a slave girl. And Achilles was so ticked that he wouldn't fight. And without him, nothing could happen. And so stuff kind of grinds along in the Iliad, and it's a little bit boring. And finally, the Greeks are so frantic to get something happening. Patroclus, the friend of Achilles, takes the armor of Achilles and dons it, and he goes out to fight. And from there, it's like, that's you taking the plug out of the wall, and everything, or the drain, and everything starts to happen. So the first thing that happens is, so then there are a whole series of pitched battles between two heroes. And the first of these pitched battles is this one, Patroclus and one of the great heroes on the Trojan side, Sarpedon. So, watching these two down on the battlefield, which is what is occurring here on this side, here are all the gods, and they are in council. This is very interesting because actually this is not exactly the way that the book describes it, the story describes it, as you can see from what you read, because really it's just a conversation between Zeus, the son of devious devising Kronos, that's Zeus, and Hera, his wife and sister. But instead we've got the whole gang. The side that is on the side of the Greeks and the side that's on the side of the Trojans. Because here's another thing that's very interesting about the story of the Trojan War. Not just a story that animated the Greeks. It was of intense interest to the gods. They watched all the time, and they did something that is very Greek. They took sides. They were invested. It mattered to them. Some of them were on the side of the Greeks, some of them were on the side of the Trojans, and they interfered. Every so often, Athena would get into disguise and go down and talk to Odysseus, for example. So they were highly engaged. So highly engaged that when this battle began down on the field of Troy, the gods wondered, or at least Zeus wondered, if he should interfere. And this is what happens. Zeus says to Hera, "Ah me, that it is destined that the dearest of men, Sarpedon, must go down under the hands of Menoetius' son, Patroclus. The heart in my breast is balanced between two ways as I ponder, whether I should snatch him out of the sorrowful battle and set him down still alive in the rich country of Lycia, or beat him under at the hands of the son of Menoetius. In other words, should I just pluck him away and save him?" Which, of course, is within the power of Zeus to do. And in turn, the lady Hera answered him, "Majesty, son of Kronos, what sort of thing have you spoken? Do you wish to bring back a man who is mortal, one long since doomed by destiny, from ill-sounding death, and release him? Do it then, but not all the rest of us gods shall approve you. Put away in your thoughts this other thing I tell you. If you bring Sarpedon back to his home still living, think how then some other one of the gods might also wish to carry his own son out of the strong encounter. No. But if he is dear to you and your heart mourns for him, after the soul and the years of his life have left him, send death to carry him away, and sleep, who is painless, until they come with him to the countryside of broad Lycia, where his brothers and countrymen shall give him due burial with tomb and gravestone. Such is the privilege of those who have perished." What's the message of the East Frieze? This is the first thing you see when you walk up the ramp to the sanctuary of Apollo. You see this, then you turn the corner, and you see the Giganta Mickey. And above this, you see the pediment with the theft, or the attempted theft, by Heracles of the tripod of Apollo. What are the Sifnians doing with this complex of stories? What are they saying to people who come to the sanctuary of Apollo? You might want to have a small chat. And the museum. In the museum at Delphi.
There's got to be another one, I think at the British Museum, with a similar lion, where it's like biting somebody, because that looks really familiar to me. I think I have a picture.
In the British Museum?
Must be the British Museum one, yeah.
It could be...
I think they're fighting like monsters, but I can't remember which one, or them.
I wonder if it's the Iliad monument from Xanthos. Because that's in the British Museum. And it's a long frieze.
Yeah, it was a really big one. I thought they were kind of monster looking. I can't remember what they were though. I'm gonna have to go back and look at my photos.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's always funny when like thinking shots. I'm like, oh, I think I've seen that one somewhere.
It still doesn't look good. It doesn't look good.
What do you think?
I guess one of the messages that we're mortal, that we're gonna die sometime. There's nothing we can really do about it.
So simply solidifying that essential truth.
Yeah.
The gods care. They talk about us. They care about us, but they make the ultimate decision about our fate.
The gods care, they talk about us. They actually care what happens to us. And our fate is in their hands. Even so, the most excellent character and the most excellent behavior cannot save you, cannot transform you from mortal to immortal. On the ground in the 6th century, to whom might a message about overstepping your human limits be sent? In the 6th century, in the Greek world, to whom might such a message be necessary? Regular people, okay, one can assume they know this. They know this fundamental truth. They see the Kuroi. They know. Youth is great. Battle is a place where you can achieve glory, but in any event, we will all die. What's the political situation in some of the cities in Greece? Tyranny. Right. Who are these guys, these tyrants? yes, certainly anybody who is a tyrant is a member of the elite class, but it's, not everybody who's a member of the elite class was a tyrant. So a tyrant is somebody who has put themselves over their fellow citizens, their fellow men. A tyrant is somebody who has put himself, not been appointed, not been elected, but put himself above. And by the later part of the 6th century BCE, that was not any longer so quickly and readily accepted by people throughout the Greek world. In the year 530, probably very close to the time that right around the time that the Sifnian Treasury was built, certainly it was in the planning stages, if not already being constructed, an alliance of city-states led by Sparta in the Peloponnese had decided to try to bring down several of the tyrannies in various of the Greek cities. And Pisistratus, who was the tyrant in Athens, assembled a group of allies. And there was not exactly a series of great big battles, but there was a certain amount of chest pounding and scuffling that went on between these groups. On the North Frieze, on the Giganta Mickey, when you go around the corner here at the Sifnian Treasury, those giants, they have different symbols on their helmets. One of them has a cup, a cantharos, a Greek wine cup. One of them has a triton. And the symbols that they have on their helmets match the symbols on the coins of various city-states. And the city-states whose coins have the same symbols as those on the helmets of the giants on the North Frieze are the allies of Pisistratus. So there is the larger cosmic idea of the mortality of man, but there is also the on-the-ground, more proximate issue of the political immortality, in a way, sought by tyrants, and the reaction against that was beginning to grow among various of the people throughout the Greek world. So, all right, I was going to have a longer conversation about this, but I'm not. I'm going to move on. So this pot that you're looking at here, again on the right by Ezekias, painted right around the same time as the Sifnian Treasury, around 530, became very, very popular. This was a theme that became very, very popular. There are over 120 versions of the story known. They appear on amphoras, they appear on lekythoi, they appear on pots large and small. None of them, of course, are as good as that of Ezekias. All of them kind of miss the intensity of the point that he provides with his very tightly constructed triangular composition that you see here. So here by the Andokides painter, for example, both of their helmets are on the ground, and their heads are at the same level, and they no longer form some sort of tight composition, and it loses a lot of its punch. Anyway, the Andokides painter is a guy who's painting in the Athenian Potter's Quarter around 520, and this is one side of an amphora that he painted, and this is the other. And of course, what this is the colors flipped around. This is black figure because the figures are in black. The color of the clay, which is red, provides the background of the scene. Everything that you see on here that's black is painted onto the pot. On this side, everything that's black is painted onto the pot, which means that what's painted onto the pot now in the area of the scene is the outline, is the background of the figures. And the figures themselves are the color of the pot. Since clay is red, this is called red figure, because figures are red. The Andokides painter is one of several painters in the Potter's Quarter in Athens towards the end of the 6th century who paint a series of vessels with the same scene on both sides, one in black figure and one in red figure. It's very show-offy. Here, this is a scene of Heracles pushing forward an ox on both sides. These pots, black on one side, red on the other, black figure on one side, red figure on the other, are called bilinguals. I think Mr. Pedley talks about these. The Andokides painter must have gone to Delphi because he, for example, paints the same scene that's on one of the pediments of the Sifnian Treasury, that is Heracles trying to abscond with the tripod of Apollo. Where did red figure painters get the idea? Probably from architectural sculpture, where the background of the sculpted panels were dark and the figures were light. What's the advantage? The advantage is that instead of incising all of the details, which you have to do on a black figure pot, you can paint them. So instead of using a hard, single, little pointy implement, kind of stick, you can use a brush. The earliest red figure vases, the figures are still very stiff because the painters were actually black figure painters who were simply transposing the way in which they made figures in black figure into red figure. So you see Heracles here, who is looking as arrested in mid kneel here down to the ground, but very, very rapidly. Oops, I'm going to just move on. Very, very rapidly, red figure painters started to fool around with the possibilities of their new medium and begin to explore ways to paint figures, create figures that were really moving around in space in much freer ways. Okay, so we have to be done now because it's now 11 o'clock, and this is where we will pick up next Tuesday.